When it comes to Star Wars Battlefront, I actually do feel a little bad for EA. Well, actually, I feel bad for DICE. The two most recent Battlefront games have basically been the only Star Wars gaming content for fans to chew on, and thus the series has been not only subject to our attentions, but also our ire. But more than that, Star Wars Battlefront 1, and I think especially 2, heavily felt the pressure of fan expectations, not only because of their role as a Battlefront game, but the only real medium of Star Wars gaming. I want to talk about that and a bunch of other topics in the context of Starfighter Assault. Starfighter Assault is a game mode in Battlefront 2, and it's my favorite game mode. I've spent a couple hundred hours playing it. I think it's really great fun, but it's also really, really dead. When I was recording the B-roll for this video, I'm pretty sure there was, and I'm not exaggerating, one active lobby. Sure, it was late at night, but when a couple of people had to leave, I was actually worried that the game wouldn't have a high enough population to even start a match. I don't think that can be described as anything but a disappointment. But why did it happen? And as we'll discuss later, what good came out of Starfighter Assault for Star Wars moving forward? Well, when talking about the bad, I think we have to go back to those fan expectations. I think DICE was most likely pressured, probably internally, to satisfy fans who not only wanted a traditional Star Wars experience on the ground, but also those who expected space combat, whether that was because of their expectations related to Battlefront 2 Classic, or just because there hasn't been a space combat game in Star Wars for a very long time. Regardless of why, what we got essentially was a bifurcated gameplay experience. There's most Battlefront 2 modes, then there's Starfighter Assault. Now, I know almost nothing about game design, but this must have immensely tested the resources of DICE and EA. With some exceptions, mostly the fact that some Starfighters can be found on ground maps, anything made for Starfighter Assault is probably mostly just benefiting that mode, so that's dev time being used on something that essentially now is not being played ever. And that's a big deal because Starfighter Assault is a big mode. There are 3 complete eras, different ships, different maps, different capital ships, and a load of art assets. For example, the interior of each Starfighter and each hero Starfighter is absolutely beautifully rendered, but no one sees that because no one plays the mode, and if you do, you probably don't play in first-person mode. It's a resource drain which hurts the game because it means that both ground and space combat now have to be, well, excuse my French, half-assed. And although I hate to admit it, looking at the game objectively, I think Star Wars Battlefront 2, now at least, would be more popular had the development time for Starfighter Assault just been put into other parts of the game, make the ground combat more compelling, and make that the bread and butter of your game. But even ignoring that fact, and just assuming that Battlefront 2 was made with unlimited time and assets, the way the game and the modes are currently set up, and will probably always be set up, is still a major problem. First of all, the bifurcated system limits the scope of both game modes and just the overall cohesiveness of Star Wars Battlefront 2. A clear example of this is the fact that progression made in space combat only minimally impacts other game modes, while progression outside of that mode has nothing to do with Starfighter Assault. Thought about another way, when you play Starfighter Assault, you're making a clear decision that you want to fly around in space, rather than play with ground heroes, shoot things, etc. This could be compared with the classic Battlefront 2, which had its own space mode of course, but which still heavily involved ground combat. You could play that game mode whether you were in the mood to fly around, man a capital ship turret, or do basically anything else. This split system really hurts the game, not only in population and just fun factor, but also how progression works, and progression is a really big part of Battlefront 2. Just the mechanics of Starfighter Assault also have some pretty serious issues which go almost down to the bones. On the more easily fixable level, we have issues with, say, spawning. Often you just fly across the battlefield for 30 seconds to be shot down from far away. It's pretty frustrating and not always entertaining. A slightly more serious issue is the fact that team balancing is just atrocious, but some of that can largely be attributed to the minuscule population. On a harder to fix issue, the gameplay itself of Starfighter Assault is far too linear, and that's a complaint I think that can be levied across all of Battlefront 2. The attacker versus defender game type, I think, is far less compelling than a neutral game mode. Something with flexibility, perhaps you each have a ship to protect, and the map is more of a backdrop, or has parts that you can interact with. Currently though, the objective gameplay I just don't think is very compelling and leads to some unpleasant realities of gameplay. First of all, much of the fighting takes place in really open space, and most kills are just random from behind, not true dogfights or fun one-on-one encounters, which is the type of content you want to encourage in a game mode like this. Ideally, when it comes to survival, spawn and initial positioning are less important than pure skill. However, the objectives are usually pretty static or slow moving, so most of the combat sort of clusters around them in a not very interesting way. We do see some exceptions to that with dynamic entities like the bombers that come in occasionally, but this problem is really obvious, especially on open maps, like Fondor, where the sight lines are long and you can be shot out pretty quickly. It's less problematic on maps like Unknown Regions, where there's naturally a lot of cover for starfighters, and because much of the combat takes place within the Star Destroyer or near the asteroids, there's more skill that's just naturally involved. The fact that the game is so scenario-based though also leads to repetitiveness, again something you can levy against the main game generally. The matches nearly always progress in the exact same way. The battles don't have any flow or narrative or even memorable moments to them, and especially when one side is dominant, it often just feels like a chore to finish a battle. It also sort of leads to maps feeling the same. Basically, you know that you're gonna have to blow something up and then you eventually move on and destroy a capital ship. I think taking away some of that structure and allowing for a more free gameplay mode, perhaps with each side having to defend their own capital ship, not only makes the games more fun, but more memorable. Having other sort of Star Wars things involved would also help. Right now, the capital ships, for example, are mostly just a backdrop, and I just don't think it's very fun to go through these elaborate ordeals to take down the shield generator and slowly take down the ship's health, when I'd rather just be protecting my own capital ship when it does that. On that note, before I move on to the positives, I just want to talk about how much of a disappointment The Last Jedi DLC was. I think DICE had a really big opportunity to get people involved in Starfighter Assault, like they did with the Death Star expansions and the Scarif expansions for Battlefront 1. A game mode where you had to assault the First Order Dreadnought, maybe protect the Resistance bombers, would have been really cool. Instead, we get a battle that has nothing to do with what we see on screen. The gravity mechanic is interesting, I guess, but just why? I don't want to dwell on that, but I think it's emblematic of some other issues that went into the mode itself. Again, the idea of half-assing two things rather than just, well, full-assing one thing. There is a lot of good to Starfighter Assault though. First of all, I think the fundamentals of the mode are sound. The starfighters control really well. I would like them to be a bit more speedy, but I understand what they were going for in the context of the larger game mode. The visuals are absolutely beautiful, and if you've never taken a second to fly from the cockpit view, you really should. In fact, every time I see someone from DICE in person, I say, please can we make a limited game mode locked to first person? Because it's such a fun way to play, but competitively it's not viable. However, right now the game just does not have a population to even further divide those who are playing Starfighter Assault. I also think it's satisfying, and despite the low population, I do think it's really fun. The hero ships are fun to use. It's cool how the heroes die a bit quicker so people get a more fair chance to play as different characters, and it uses a completely different type of skill than a traditional Battlefront game. These factors generally tie into the reasons why I'm excited for the game. I think the work done on Starfighter Assault will lead us into future Starfighter content. DICE now has assets. They've made the engine work a certain way, and again, I don't know much about game development, but they've got experience. That will help not only for the eventual Battlefront 3 if such a game is made, but also in different projects. On the small scale, perhaps we'll get another experience like the Death Star or Scarif attack, or even the Rogue One VR thing we got connected with Battlefront 1. But I also see no reason why Starfighter Assault couldn't serve as the foundation for a completely separate game. Yes, there's lots you'd have to change. Things from starfighter speed to the type of missions decisions and gameplay, but I think you get my point. Some of the work has already been done. I guess whoever does the future project just needs to find the other half-ass that wasn't around earlier. And I just want to be clear on that note, I'm not being critical of DICE here. I completely understand why they did what they did. I do think they made mistakes in designing the game mode itself. I obviously would have preferred an update to the classic Battlefront 2 mode, not only because I think it would make the space combat more interesting, but also because starfighters right now in land battles are almost completely useless other than for farming points. So a more cohesive implementation helps both game modes individually as well as together. Still, it's obvious that both DICE and EA are learning. It's really incredible how the game has transformed since launch, and although they didn't focus on my preferred mode, I still think it's commendable, especially where all the updates have been free. Hopefully, moving forward, we'll see not only more of the same, but also more Star Wars games generally from DICE and, well, everyone else who works with EA. I think if someone had made a TIE Fighter vs. X-Wing remaster, then DICE wouldn't even have bothered with Starfighter Assault. We need to split the burden. That, however, has just been my opinion, as has everything in this video. What do you think? Do you agree with my analysis of Starfighter Assault and why it ultimately failed? Or am I incorrect, and is Starfighter Assault actually doing really well? Was the game mode destined to fail? Does it have a future? Do you think we'll get a Starfighter dedicated game or experience within a game? Let me know all of that and more down in the comments. But that's all I have for you guys today. As always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and may the Force be with you.